G'day listeners, Sammy Gordon here from Australian Property Scout. If you're loving all the property investment content over here at SBI, you will love the Scouting Australia podcast. Hosted by myself alongside my good mate and experienced investor Jimmy Ibrahim, we unpack everything from real investor stories, mindset hacks, and a massive amount of property investment strategies and much, much more. Check us out over at the Scouting Australia podcast and take your investing to a new level.
This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
G'day, how you going? Welcome to the podcast. Phil Tarrant, Managing Editor of Financial Services, Real Estate, Momentum Markets. Hope you're well. Don't use my official title very often. Most of you will just know that I am the guy that's been hosting the Smart Property Investment Show for too long now. We were pretty early on in the podcast game and the show just continues to grow and evolve. So it's cool. I enjoy doing podcasts. I get to chat to a whole bunch of people from all walks of life who are in and around property. They're property investors and or professionals that help people invest in property, of which is still an emerging and surging sector of Australian economy. Will real estate today be sort of sold at the same cadence of what it will in 20 years' time? I think you're probably going to see the quiet hand of the buyer's agent involved in a lot more. And I do note that over in America, they're even thinking about, I think it's before the justice apparatus of America, that if you don't know about this, typically the buyer and the seller have an advocate, so an agent will do the selling, and you'll have a buyer's agent, and they essentially share the commission, which is highly conflicted. So that may change. Very different in Australia. We have buyer's agents out here, but you pay them fee for service, and there's some very good ones around. One of them is Victor Kumar, who joins me in the studio. He's been doing this for many years. You're probably one of the early buyer's agents in Australia, yes?
I'd probably say that we were one of the first few.
One of the first few.
There are a few that have been around a little bit longer than us, but definitely we were the first few out there.
Yeah.
But I must say that I was sort of dreading the introduction because when you used big titles, and I was thinking that there's a big sledge coming straight away. But you called me the OG, so I'm happy.
The OG, one of the OGs. And I could think of people who may have been a little bit earlier than you guys, maybe like a Rich Harvey from
Metropole. They would be the
Metropole,
two.
Yeah, but you guys are absolutely OG.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, pretty much when buyer's agents were not fashionable.
Yeah, when it was, who are you guys? What do you do? Well, I need to pay you to find a property. I'll just do it myself, thank you very much. You know, it's all on the internet now.
Yep.
And people still say the same thing.
That's right, yeah. And we had to explain to the agent that we're not after their commission. You know, we get paid by the clients.
Do you reckon they were nervous for a while? Because going back to America, like I think it's going to get contested, right?
It will be. It will be. There's such a big conflict, right? If you're acting on both the vendor and the purchaser's behalf.
But it's like 6% commission, right? And they share it.
Yep.
They go, okay, and then they negotiate on how much they share.
Yes.
So
it's crazy.
The agent that operates on behalf of the buyer is sitting there with who's probably their friend on the other side going, oh, look, you know, I don't really need to drive the price down too much because the greater the price, the more commission in the commission pool. I'll keep the price high, but I want to take 60% of the commission. Yep. That must happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Has to happen. Has to happen. Oh, that's dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, but
hopefully that changes.
I use my my important title, Victor, because I've been in Canberra the last week. I was down there for a whole bunch of different things and just getting a feel for things. I was sort of hanging around Parliament House and catching up with a whole bunch of MPs, sitting government ministers and also the opposition, just getting a feel for what's going on out there. And I'll tell you what, property taxes is going to be a hot item when we come up to the next federal election, which is probably going to be next year at some point.
Yep.
I think the earliest they can call it is late this year, but I don't think they will do it. It'll be next year at some point. All about property taxes. It's all headlines everywhere at the moment. It's all around property taxes. Crazy stuff, mate.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember in one of the publications that I mentioned that because of COVID, we're going to look at clawing back money into the system because we spent a lot of money with the shoring up the economy during COVID, during the lockdowns. So we need to refill the coffers, right? And the easiest way to refill the coffers is to tinker with the tax system, right? And unfortunately, property is the easiest baby to flog because it does drive sentiment, particularly when you're going into an election year. It seems that it's the favorite thing to flog to get those discussion points, that the pub test happening. And invariably, most times they back down. And I think the last time there was a big back down was when they lost the unlosable elections.
Yeah. And I think Labor Party, the current government, learned a sage lesson there. But property as an enabler for economic growth in Australia is huge. And there's property taxes at all levels, at local, at state, and at federal now. There's a lot of incentives around property as well. So these things, sometimes you think, well, it's sort of counter-cyclical because they provide all these incentives to help people buy homes. However, the governments make a lot of money from people transacting property. So at a local level, if you're doing developments, you're paying property taxes there. You're also paying fees for the places that you own to the local council. At a state government level, 2/3 of all their taxes plus is generated through property income. So land tax and also stamp duty fill the government coffers, state government coffers with tax. And then at the federal level, obviously there's federal grants, but property again being a great way to generate tax receipts. It's complicated and it's so interconnected with absolutely everything. And when you think about immigration, Victor, to your point, curbing immigration ain't good because all those skilled migrants come to Australia, guess what they do? They pay tax.
Yes.
So how do you increase tax income? Increase migration. But then you have an issue with what we hear now as the housing affordability crisis. So here we are. This is a property podcast.
It is.
Where do we start?
And well, when these migrants come in, and I'm a migrant as well, right? I did not come in with my fridge. I did not come in with my bed. So I came in and I bought stuff here, right? Which then drives up inflation because the demand increases.
You're behind inflation, are you?
Yeah, that's it.
But it's so interconnected. It is so interconnected.
Yeah.
So interconnected.
And I think that when you really look at it, right, so we talk about tax and how property plays a big part in the tax discussion. We have this right now, Canberra's talking about, curbing negative gearing. The last time we actually did this was in 87.
It's under Keating, correct?
Yep, under Keating, yeah. And put aside the immediate downside of it in terms of some people rely heavily on the tax incentives to hold on to their property. Let's put that aside for a minute, right? And think this through. Back in 87, when they did do away with the negative gearing, the prices of property came down a bit. However, the rents went up phenomenally, right? And then, of course, as the rents went up, people started jumping and saying, hey, there's good rent, there's affordability. I don't need the negative gearing anymore. So it started the new investors that are jumping in, and they realized that, hang on, we're actually tipping the balance over here. There's less rental properties in the market now. I mean, if you bring it back to today, we're already in a shortage, right? So we're going to tip that more into deficit as such. And when that corrects again, when the government corrects the legislation back to where it was, then the rents don't come down as much, right? So from an investor who's already holding a portfolio and can sustain that immediate hit of the negative gearing going away, happy days. Happy days.
Yeah, I think and sort of spending time in and around Canberra, I think there's still a sentiment, and this is right across Australia as well, is that people invest in property first for the tax consequence. So people go, yes, I have a negative gearing strategy.
Yep.
And there is this misnomer, universal, I think, in many ways, and right across Australia, and particularly in some quarters of government, where they think people invest in property to get a tax deduction.
Yeah.
It's not a strategy.
Not the case. It's not a strategy. So if you're trying to create wealth through property, generally there are two very divergent strategies, right? A tax minimization strategy and a wealth creation strategy in property generally are very divergent. But if it go back to the basics of all of this, right? So there's circa 2.34 million investors in Australia. The bulk of them are your ordinary mum and dads that are earning circa 150, 180 as a household, right? So who are we taxing really, right? The battler that's trying to create something for their retirement, right? And
That's
then when
middle
you look,
Australia.
Yes.
You're talking about middle Australia.
Absolutely, yeah. And then when you look at it historically, we have increase in number of, generally each year, we have about 60 to 80K increase in that number of property investors. And we know this about 2 years after the fact because that's when all the tax returns are in the system and so forth, right? But if you look at, say, 2018, 2019, actually dropped. So instead of 80,000, it had dropped to, I think, 18 or thereabouts as the number of new investors adding to that number. This year or the last year, because the interest rates were so high and affordability wasn't there, we actually went into negative territory. So we reduced the number of property investors.
I didn't know that. Is that the case?
So it's gone backwards, right? Now
That's for the 23 financial year.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you look at that, and then when you add this negative gearing impact, guess what we're going to do? We're going to reduce the number of investors yet again. Some will sell up because they're heavily geared and they need the tax deductions. There are others that will say, well, I really wanted to save my tax and that's the reason for investing, so they won't invest. So we'll reduce the number of property investors, and as a direct consequence, we're already in a rental shortage. There'll be even more rental shortage. So the system that they're trying to fix, they're breaking it yet even more.
Property taxes is complicated and it's complex. And as I mentioned and reporting back from Canberra, it'll be a huge discussion running up to the next federal election, and a lot of the parties will be, and they're still sort of creating their policies or testing their ideas around it right now. But this is what you're going to see, particularly the Greens. And I don't know how across you are of this, but they've got quite a vocal Greens housing spokesperson, Max Chandler Mather, and he's very vocal at the moment. And essentially what's happening is that Anthony Albanese's government's trying to get this Help to Buy scheme through, which I think by memory is 10,000, funding for 10,000 affordable or low-cost homes for the next 4 years, where the government takes an equity stake in the thing, right?
So if it's an old home, they'll take up to 30% stake. If it's a brand new home, up to 40%.
They'll take 40%.
Yep.
So this is the government being property investors, right? Is what it is, and therefore banking on the health and the integrity of the Australian property market. Now, what happens is that should that property get sold, the government gets its money back and a share of the upside. So the government wants property to increase in value, right? So this is what's happening. So the coalition's gone, no, we're not supporting that. No, let's get stuff. No way in the world for whatever reason. So they've got to turn to the Greens to try and get the votes they need for it to stand up. And they're pretty much saying, we'll agree to this thing on the basis that you do something about negative gearing, scale back property taxes. And something I've been sort of watching a bit of commentary around it, reading the papers. Some of the language being used by the Greens is hugely inflammatory, and I would think a lot of property investors would find offensive. And we have a favourable audience here of property investors, right? I don't know how many sort of Greens property investors are tuning into this.
That's right,
podcast,
So
I imagine a lot of people are there going, I know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. So in a woke society, we are being victimized.
Yes. Yeah. So it's dirty now to be a property investor.
Yes.
From what I understand, we're gouging Australia. We're the pickpockets of the Australian economy. This is the language that's being used. It's highly contested at the moment.
It sort of reminds me, there's a show on Netflix and was on TV as well, West Wing, right? And you see all this argy-bargy that happens in the background where they're positioning in the media as very stalwart and all, but there's all this white anting happening in the background, trying to move positions so that they get enough votes to get the bill across the line, right? And I guess that politics is a bit that way above my pay grade. I would say that a lot of this commentary may not actually materialize, but if it does materialize, it'll actually further damage the economy, the housing supply as such, and we really need to be vocal as property investors to oppose that, right? And when the negative gearing scenario was happening, PIPA was very vocal and it was very instrumental in changing opinions out there. And I think we would, as a collective, both PIPA and PICA, so the property investors and the property professionals, we need to really, as an organization out there, stand up and start making noise before this gathers momentum and actually becomes a thing.
Yeah, well, it is a thing, and it's been made a thing. And I think this particular housing spokesperson is trying to make a name for himself, and this is a nice platform for doing it. But I think the Greens, in many ways, and this is not a political podcast, but the Greens in many ways are trying to find its way through politics now because they're really dialing down sort of the environment and climate change angle, and now they're trying to build themselves up as the party for Australian renters.
Yep.
So they have this view that property investors are the scourge of Australia and they're stopping renters from being able to buy property. Now, I've listened to all the debate. Not one person has yet said, in theory, that's fine. You know, that all Australians should have the ability to buy property, and are property investors pricing out Australian renters? That's not the debate. Where the question needs to be asked is, how many of those renters can actually get a home loan?
Yes.
How many of them are able to save money? How many of them are going to be viewed by a bank as a safe bet to lend money to? No one has asked this, and no one's got any science or no research around this. And I doubt it's all of them. That's guaranteed it's not all of them. There will be a fraction of those renters who will be able to at some point in time, not because of housing affordability, because of the ability to raise a deposit or have the efficacy to borrow money. No one's talking about this.
Sounds like a referendum. Yes.
But no one's asked the question. Like no one's gone, oh, that's good in theory, but how many of these renters could actually get enough money together to buy a house? You're buying property in Perth. You can buy property in Perth for $300,000.
Probably not anymore.
Probably not anymore because of you guys. But it's absolute madness. It's absolute madness.
Yeah, it is. It is. And the reality of it is, right, that you're right, that not everyone wants home ownership, right? No. They're quite comfortable paying the rent, so they have the flexibility. They don't want a mortgage. They're at the stage in life where they want to earn money, have a good job, have a good social life.
And have fun.
Have fun. Yeah. And eventually they may turn into home ownership, or we may go down the routes of, say, New York, where the bulk of people are renters, not homeowners, right? So as it stands, if you're buying a house in Sydney, it's 11 times or 18 times, depending which suburb you're buying, of your income. That's your mortgage, right? So that's a huge, huge outlay. And you're shackled for 30, 40 years.
Yeah. Do you really want that? Be careful what you wish for.
That's right.
Be careful what you wish for. It's a huge responsibility being a homeowner. You got mortgage repayments to meet, you know, and it gets tough. And, you know, I don't want to sort of discount a lot of the strain and pressures a lot of people with mortgages are going through right now. They've got mortgages at an interest rate that started with a 2 and now it starts with a 6.
That's how the cycle works.
That's how the cycle works, you know. And that sounds a bit blasé, but, you know, this entitlement that every Australian should have their own home to live in, I think it's a fractured and a mindset of many, many years past. Sydney, Melbourne, particularly Brisbane, they're big global cities these days. You know, it's just the dynamics of property. But, you know, this battleground around sort of negative gearing, taking it to election, like everyone does have a choice, right? They can vote. Who they want to vote for. And, you know, I think that's what will transpire. We'll just go to a quick break, everyone. Stay with us. When we come back, I want to just pull this apart a bit further. Back in a moment.
Are you looking to invest for a big return, but are unsure which suburb is up and coming and guaranteed to give you the most bang for your buck? Smart Property Investment and Pure Property Investment have unveiled the Fast 50 report for 2025, identifying the suburbs backed by research that are giving investors the highest returns. Don't make any investing decisions until you read the free report. Visit smartpropertyinvestment.com.au to download the report.
Welcome back. Phil Tarrant from Smart Property Investment Chat with Victor Kamara, Director over at Right Property Group. Now, Victor, I don't think the government will do anything with negative gearing. I think they've been burned. I think this issue's just being super politicised at this moment in time. But I don't think it's going to go away at any point soon.
Once bitten, twice shy, obviously. And if you look at it from the Greens' point of view, they're pitching to the renters. That's a big voting pool.
It's huge.
As well.
A third of Australians rent.
Yeah.
A third of Australians rent.
So I think there's more politics astray over here than really trying to fix the system. And if we were to fix the system, obviously we need to break it first and break the fundamentals of it, because when you really look at it, the rental crisis that we have of today is not the making of just COVID, right? It's the making of the last 7 to 10 years of little decisions we've made along the way, construction and how that's panned out, local government intervention and bureaucracy. We're simply not building enough and we're letting in too many people. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a cause and effect, right? So as we get more people in, the rental crisis deepens. As we cease to empower the ordinary punter to provide accommodation, in other words, do away with negative gearing, they'll have a cause and effect. So all of those things do play out in the longer term. And if we really wanted to solve this issue, we don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction of, let's do away with capital gains tax or tinker with capital gains tax, tinker with negative gearing. We need to look at the whole global property system in Australia and see how we can fix and how we can make it easier to build more accommodation for the renters.
Everyone talks about this housing crisis.
Mm-hmm.
No one yet has really articulated what are they. Everyone just throws the terms around. Now, it's been manufactured.
Yes.
The current property market has been manufactured because the government, that's a general term, state, federal, local, at any time could release more land. They can instantly change development planning laws. They can instantly change zoning largely. All these things are available and they can pull the levers and press the button whenever they want to do it, right? Everyone talks about this rental or this housing accommodation crisis, right? There are people who are doing it tough and I don't want to sort of dismiss the issue. There are people living in their cars as families. That's bad, right? And I think it's incumbent on the government to provide housing for those people who aren't as fortunate as others who can participate in the property economy, right? And I think that's the point. The build to, the Help to Buy scheme is targeted, I think, appropriately at certain segments of the Australian population. They support younger Australians trying to break into the property market and or single parents, particularly women who are looking to, I think that's good. It's 10,000 properties though. I don't know how many properties get sold every year, 500,000, right? It's a fraction.
Yes.
It's an absolute fraction. Now, what the Greens are saying is that, that's all a lottery. Like, they don't think it's a good idea that the government or Prime Minister's plan. They go, well, that's only really going to be accessible to zero. I think the number 0.2% of all renters will be able to participate in what they're calling this lottery, right? They're going, it's a stupid idea, right? They're saying that the government should essentially be landlords. They should own all of the housing in Australia and make that available to people rather than evil property investors who get tax benefits by doing it. We know through history that the governments
they're bad landlords.
They're not good landlords. they're not good landlords. Hence the reason why they've configured the apparatus of property investment or the rental economy in the hands of Australians through wealth creation.
Yeah, we tried it through this housing commission homes, right? The social housing. We tried to emulate what US was doing back then, and it was a failed experiment, right? Because you've got then, again, with the types of tenants they were putting back then in there, it was a mixture. It was just a recipe for disaster. There are properties out there that the governments, the state governments and the federal government, they're doing it better now and they're making it more dispersed and not concentrated in one area. The other thing that they're doing, of course, is the build to rent scenario, right? And the first one's going to come online in Melbourne in 2026. So these are huge apartments.
Is that Meriton?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Now, good incentive, but if you think of it, we're then putting all of these people in the one lot. And it might not be the desired place for them to live, right? They might want to live elsewhere. So what we've done is we've taken the choice away and saying, hey, you're going to live here in this complex and here's the incentive to live here. And we're going to give the incentive to the corporations to build. Now, if we change that around and gave the incentive to your mum and dad in suburbia, it gives you a lot more accommodation, a whole lot faster. Make the granny flat bills easier, make the renting out of properties far easier, make the approvals a whole lot easier, get rid of the red tape, and we will, by and large, fix a whole portion of this scenario. It's never going to go away, right? So, one of the things I as you know, I do a lot of is renovating properties, right?
Yes.
And I love tearing up the carpets, pulling up the carpets, and you invariably find underneath the kitchen, the old newspapers, right?
Yeah.
Every single newspaper you find, it still says housing is unaffordable or there's a shortage, right? So this is systemic. It's been there for, I think the oldest newspaper I have found was in the 68 or 67 and still had the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always been there. And Australia, as the big cities in Australia continue to grow and evolve, if you picked up Sydney and put it in America, I think it'll be the third or the fourth biggest city in America. It's a big joint.
It's a big joint.
It's a big joint. Same with Melbourne. So these are big global cities. So I think it's very difficult. And I don't dismiss the huge challenge that governments have in trying to work this out, to try and get this cadence of balancing social housing.
Yep.
For, and I think NDIS, for example, is doing some great work around this NDIS housing. I think it's really smart stuff, but we've got to be able to separate, I think, what are the responsibilities and accountabilities of government in providing social housing versus structurally how do you house the third of Australians that rent?
Exactly.
So this will be a big contentious issue before. We're not going to solve it today.
No.
Victor, we're certainly not going to solve it today.
Yeah. Look, I think every time there's an election coming up, this does rear its heads up. And if we look historically, the negative gearing has reared its head up several times. So, every cycle it raises its heads up. It seems like it's a favorite child to bash. That's such a thing for politicians because it gets the
A lot of
reaction.
politicians own investment property, by the way.
Yes.
This has all come out as part of this.
Well, if you look at it, right? So if I start talking, let's say you and I on this podcast, we start talking about let's do away with negative gearing. Let's make it harder for people to own properties, and property is going to crash. The media picks up on it. So all of a sudden we're on telly. They've got a name plastered there. We're on the publications. So it does have a self-fulfilling prophecy for the person that's actually saying it to put them in the eyes of the public. And especially when you're getting into election year, it's a very easy play.
It's if you want to build your profile, it's
Say something controversial.
Say something controversial, and what's it? About 2.5 million Australians, 2.4 something million Australians invest in property. That's a lot. It's a big part of the work. I think full time working population in Australia is about 8 or 9 million.
Yes,
did I get that right? It's about that. Yeah, and I think there's like maybe 13 or 14 million workers. I've probably got those numbers completely wrong, but that's a big cohort.
It is.
And to give some sense of it all, to policies like this, which are going to impact 40,000 people versus the 2.4 million people who are providing rental accommodation, it pales in its significance.
It does. And when you further drill into those figures, right, and they're talking about the evil landlord holding multiple properties, holding people to rent, some paying me higher rent.
Well, even Albo's been called property investor prime minister.
Yeah, that's right. So you've got circa 30,000 of those 2.4 mil investors that own more than 6 properties, right? So it's not like every investor is absolutely rolling on it. They're trying to cater for their retirement. They're trying to buy properties so it goes up in value and they sell. The average investor sells in within 5 years.
Yeah. No, is it? And this is the issue, right? Like this is going to shape and change property dynamics. Obviously, a big part of this also, what the Greens are asking for is around, dialing back CGT tax base at 50%. I watched Insiders on the ABC on Sunday, and David Spears, who's the host, was pushing this Max Chandler Mather on this, pretty much going, well, what's going to be your policy going in the election? And go, well, we're essentially still working that out, but we'll go to what we said last time, which is they would be okay for Australians to negative gear one property, is their view. No, one's enough.
Yep.
One's enough. You've got to make enough available for other people. But the other big thing, and I'm coming to a point on this, the other big thing is, trying to regulate rentals. So already property investors in most states can only increase rents once a year.
Yep.
But they're going to try and cap it. I think I hear numbers around 2%. That's under inflation.
Yes. Yeah, so Canberra was looking at it as a state where there'll be a cap for 2 years, and then after that, each year only are allowed to increase it by 2%, which is crazy. Like you said, it's just below the CPI.
Yeah. Yeah. And what isn't pulled into this is that most property investors, all property investors now, if they've got a mortgage, are paying at 6.7%,
Yes.
right? So a lot of pressure on this. The last thing we need is for property investors not to be investing in property.
Correct.
Because it comes back to the point, if they stop investing in property, a lot of the renters still can't buy property.
And so what happens? The rents go up.
Yeah, rents go up. So it won't functionally change, I think, in the long term property prices if they did remove negative gearing. And how can you regulate price increases on one particular segment of the Australian economy, i.e. rents, and not regulate everything else? They don't regulate fuel. They don't regulate groceries. You can't just regulate the one thing.
Sounds like class action to me.
It does, doesn't it? Oh, God. They can kick it off anyway. It's going to give us plenty of food for thought. But the question is, Vic, this is what I was getting to, should this stop you investing in property? All of this noise around negative gearing, and what they're going to do is restricting your ability to functionally run your business. As in, if you're running a business, as a property investor, profit and loss, you generate revenue, you try and minimise your costs, so you've got a little bit left.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So if you can't change your revenue line because of regulation, should you just stop investing in property, or should you just press ahead? You're just going to say press ahead.
Of course I will. I will. And like I said right in the beginning, bring it on. right? So if we look at the mechanics of it and the business case for why we should continue investing, interest rates at the peak of the cycle, so it's only going to get better in terms of holding cost as the rates drop, right? We're not constructing enough property, so there's a shortage. So shortage of supply means increased revenue. Now, revenue is twofold. You've got rent and you've got growth, right? We've got next level migration. We're starting to taper that down, but that still creates the demand. And we've got very, very recent social proof of big growth. So as soon as APRA changes its assessment criteria and allows more people to borrow a bit more, people will jump in. It'll become a self-perpetuating, right? So we've got all of this set up that, let's say, argument's sake, that the next 3 years will be some really good growth, right? And in that 3 years, let's say year one, we had the negative gearing taken away. You still got the growth, right? So long as you buy within your means and not take tax into account, your rents will continue going up and it'll go up even higher because there are less people investing. So the informed investor will grab it by the horns and actually make some really good revenue in terms of growth, in terms of their portfolio, because they're investing at a time where there's upheaval. Every time you invest at a time when there's upheaval, so let's what are the upheavals? Back then, 2018, 2017, we capped lending to property investors back to 80%, 90% was not a thing anymore, right? Then the rates that investors were paying a lot higher, it still is. Then we got in the APRA scenario where the assessment rate is now 3%, even though the interest rate was lower. The flow of money became harder because the assessment rate was higher. It's still high. So we are sort of putting hurdles in front of property investors as it is, and that stems the supply. And we know we are hugely undersupplied. So regardless of what's thrown into the mix, the market's going to go up if your asset selection is correct.
Okay, well, that's encouraging. Thank you. We'll go to another quick break. Stay with us. Back in a moment. Welcome back. Phil Tarrant for Smart Property Investment with Victor Kumar. So some sage wisdom before the break, Victor, around irrespective of what happens with property taxes, the inherent drivers, dynamics of the market from property investors moving forward. While I've got you, what else is going on other than property taxes? What are you seeing around Australia at the moment, mate?
Look, obviously rents are still going up, right? And the sentiment is definitely changing. There are more people at the open homes since Michelle Bullock came out and gave a soft statement to say, maybe we've seen the last of rate rises. Maybe there's a rate cut sooner than you guys think. And so the sentiment is turning in terms of the market, right? So there's a lot more people looking at investing. At this time of the year especially, we've also got the added factor, the added catalyst of your New Year's resolution people as well that are starting to jump in and say, let's do something for ourselves. So it's definitely on a upward trajectory with most areas. Some areas are already peaking. Other areas are just starting to wake up after a short lull in terms of value increases.
So where's that?
Well, you can't look past Victoria. You know, that's sort of sitting in the doldrums.
I've sort of heard this, yeah.
If you look at, and this is cyclical, right? So as a word of caution now, if I say Victoria or Perth or Brisbane, you need to drill it back to what you're trying to achieve, right? And not just follow blindly someone behind a microphone saying that this is the area to invest. But if you look at cycles, arguably Melbourne's turning the corner and is now on an upward trajectory. And it has to because your supply is so low. Your constructions were at a standstill. There was, I think, from numbers point of view, last financial year, 1,843 builders went bust in Australia. 40% of them came from Melbourne.
Okay.
Right? So construction's at a slow, right? Very low over there. When you look at other states, they're all at various cycles. And so you are still looking at the cycles, but you need to look at the opportunity, right? So in that cycle, in that phase, in that market, what's the type of property you need to buy? And as soon as you start addressing that, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, okay. It's always good to chat, mate. You always,
Same here.
Any particular suburbs in Victoria, Melbourne? What
now you'll have to subscribe to the podcast to be able to hear that.
So you guys busy at the moment, right? Property?
We are. Yeah.
Yes. And just people at all ends of the buying spectrum you're chatting to at the moment, sort of new investors and how often do you come across someone with 20 or 30 properties?
We do occasionally. So we do a separate service, which is a portfolio review, to give them insight as to what they should do next in line with the goals and all that. It is not often, but we do make them, 10, 15, 20 property investors.
Yeah. Well, if people want to reach out to you guys, what's the best way to find you?
Absolutely. So just go onto our website, rightpropertygroup.com.au, or just ping us on the socials.
I didn't want to really give you a plug, but I'll do it. So I feel that
since I've given the state away, right?
Yeah. Since you gave me something, so that's enough for me to be kind to you. But that's Victor Kumar, Director, Right Property Group. Go and check these guys out. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. It's probably not the first time we're going to be talking about property taxes on this show in 2024, and I'll let you know what I'm hearing. And entertain yourself. Go and listen to some of the commentary around negative gearing debate. And you probably sort of have a wry smile, I think, sometimes when you hear what's going on. Anyway, go and check out smartpropertyinvestment.com.au. Smart Property HQ is where you find us on social media. See you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.
Feeling trapped by rising interest payments? Escape from mortgage prison with expert refinancing assistance from Finny. We have helped hundreds of borrowers break free from higher loan repayments by finding a more suitable loan. Our expert team can quickly assess your situation, and if there's a better lender available, we'll find it fast. Don't delay. Call today. Speak to a Finny mortgage specialist on 02 8866 2444 or visit our website at www.finny.com.au.